Hi, welcome to the first webinar on detached youth work as part of No Knives Better Lives Detached Youth Work Month. I'm Emily and I'm part of the No Knives Better Lives team. Today I'm talking to Mary Q. Burnside and Shelley Cummings from Granton Youth in Edinburgh. Mary and Shelley, do you want to introduce yourself?
Yeah, I'm Mary Q. Burnside and I am the manager at GY, but I have a real interest in detached youth work, street work, and have been involved in that service, delivering it and designing it for probably about the last 6-7 years.
And I'm Shelley Cummings and I'm the volunteer manager at Granton Youth. I'm also part of the detached street work team. And I have been involved in the street work team now for 10 plus years.
So today Mary and Shelley will be sharing their experiences of managing and running detached youth work. For those who aren't sure, detached youth work is a model of youth work practice targeted at young people on their own territory, so like streets, parks, and open and shared public spaces. Today's webinar focuses on getting started with detached youth work. So Mary and Shelley, do you think it's important to know your purpose for delivering detached youth work?
Absolutely. It's the first thing that you need to know before you even go out on the street is, why are you going out on the street and what do you want to achieve? If you don't know that, then the rest makes it very difficult.
Yeah, I mean, I would totally agree with that. And in terms of when you go out and what you're trying to deliver, your team need to be well informed of the purpose. Otherwise, you're going out there and you're in a very unstructured situation. And so you need to absolutely have an awareness of what you're trying to achieve and that everyone's singing from the same hymn sheet.
So with that in mind, what purpose have you got in place with your organisation, or does that differ from practitioner to practitioner?
Well, initially when street work was set up at GY, it was to counter the amount of young people drinking alcohol on the streets, parks, whatever. And there was a real problem at that point. And that's evolved over the years because we found that alcohol abuse was less of a thing. And there was a lot of weed being smoked, there was a lot of risk-taking behaviour, either, crime or, sexual activity. And so we evolved our alcohol brief intervention approach, which is a medical model, to UBIs, which are universal brief interventions. So using the same approach, but to basically tackle all risk-taking behaviours, which fits quite nicely with the whole COVID thing as well.
Mm-hmm. So Shelley, when you're as a youth worker, do you kind of have that purpose in mind kind of each time you go out? Is that something that you remind yourself of?
Always, every time we're out, because as Mary says, it's a very unstructured, we don't have control of a lot of the situation. It varies so differently to indoor youth work that it's sometimes quite hard to comprehend, because when you're indoors, you make all the rules, you make all the boundaries, you make all the guidelines. But when you're on the streets, you don't have that ability. You obviously do have your own boundaries that you accept and don't accept. But in terms of looking at what we're actually doing, we have less control. We don't go out and say, right, we're going to do a pool tonight and then we're going to have this in the kitchen and then we're going to have that. We're on their terms. And that means that it's a triage situation. We don't know what we're walking into. So we need to have a vast array of knowledge so that we can use whatever we need out of our knowledge to help us in that situation. So experience is a massive thing when it comes to street work.
And you touched on it there, but can you maybe explain some of the differences for those people or practitioners who haven't maybe practiced detached youth work, about what some of the differences are between youth work that you're doing both inside and perhaps even outside street work versus detached youth work?
So yeah, I don't think people always understand it, but the massive difference with street work and conventional indoor youth work is it's all on their terms. So when they come into a club, they come into a club with a youth club with an unwritten contract of, this is how my behaviour is going to be. But on the streets, we're approaching them in their space and their time, and whether they engage with us is entirely up to them. and it varies depending on what they're getting up to, what the plans are for the rest of the night, if there's any motorbikes kicking about, if the weather's really good, if the police are kicking about, and that all impacts on whether or not they actually engage. Whereas in a youth club, you don't have that. They want to engage because they've attended it.
Mm-hmm. But the voluntary aspect's still important, right?
Of course. And we have moments where a young person that we've maybe had good engagements with for 3 or 4 weeks, I'll then say, nah, not tonight. Not quite as nicely as that, but yeah, they'll say not tonight. And then we go, right, pal, see you later. We'll try again next week. And then it's not personal. It's not that they're saying that to us personally. It's just where they're at that moment.
Mm-hmm. And Shelley, Mary, sorry, from a manager's perspective, Shelley was just talking about the risk and the preparation required and it being like a triage situation. From your perspective, as a manager of the organisation, what preparation is required?
So when staff go out, then they would let me know what time they're going out, and then they would call in when they finished their shift, and they would flag up anything that was going on. We also have a code word as well. So if anybody's in a situation where they feel unsafe, so the code word might be I need the loo or something like that, and then the team know that that person is feeling either that there's something going to kick off, or they feel intimidated, they don't feel comfortable. That can be particularly maybe when it's round about Guy Fawkes and there's fireworks, or there's maybe a fight about to kick off or something like that. And so the team would immediately react to that and say, right guys, see you later, off they would go. So that's the kind of the safety mechanisms that we have in place. We've had team leaders in the past who have contacted the police and raised a job number so that the police are aware that the team are out and about. That's not always necessary, but you know, some people find that's an extra kind of safety measure, if you like. But the police were well known. We go out there, everybody's in their kind of streetwork livery, red hoodies, red jackets, ID badges. The police know us, but they also know to not engage with us when we're doing street work, so that the young people aren't suspicious that we're there kind of acting on behalf of the police. So there's about that kind of confidentiality and protection and yeah, the safety of the relationship we have with the young people, but also that the police know that we're out and they see us, and that's another mechanism that's in place.
Mm-hmm. And then how would you prepare for a detached youth work session? So Mary's just touched on some of the, I suppose, risk elements, the kind of behind the scenes stuff. What about really before you go out and you're doing detached youth work, Shelley?
So, I mean, our biggest asset when we're out is ourselves. So we don't carry bags, we don't carry anything in our bags. And that's adapted over time because we did used to. It was something that we used to do. We used to have hot chocolate in our bags. We used to carry condoms in our bags. And because the needs of the young people that we're working with have changed, it's no longer required. The only thing that we really do to prepare is let Mary know that when we're going out, and then wear our uniforms. That's our preparation.
Usually, I mean, we would also act on any information that was coming in. So because we have quite a good local knowledge, we attend a lot of network meetings, so we would have an awareness of where young people were gathering, if there was any particular issues going on in the community, so that we would know to target specific areas or to handle any particular situations or have conversations with young people about specific issues that were going on that were relevant at the time. You know, if there was a lot of house break-ins, if there was a lot of thefts of motorbikes, if there was maybe some drugs going around that were less than safe, then we would know to go out. So it's kind of mental preparation rather than, you know, physically having a kit of activities or anything like that.
And is that something that you prepare for in a team, Shelley? Is that you have like someone who goes out with you?
Yeah, we're always out in pairs, minimum sometimes 3 or 4, depending on the night. But yeah, we would have that conversation, and then when we met up with the person that we were going out on street work with, we would also recap last week to be like, all right, remember, if we see that person, that's what we have to do. So we do. It's like, but it is all mental. we do the debrief of the previous week, and then if there's anything new been happening in the area, that would be the only preparation.
And you're saying that you used to have kind of a bag of goodies, I suppose, kit bag, and you said the needs changed. How did you make that decision then from kind of having that kit with you to then deciding actually those things weren't necessary?
I suppose we done it as the team stopped using it on a week-to-week basis. And the less that we were using the bag, the less need there was for us to be carrying the bag, because a lot of time and effort went into maintaining the bags. And it just, we had a change in staffing. The manager that was managing the project left, a new manager came in, there were some changes made there, and it just meant that by wayside it stopped being used, and it didn't make an effect on our work that we were doing.
Mm-hmm. And for the young people, how do you think they view you? You touched on that a little bit with relationships with the police, for example, so the police not talking to you while you're delivering detached youth work. How do young people view you, maybe if they haven't engaged before, when you're out doing detached youth work?
I think they can be a bit suspicious. So, the first thing we would do if it's young people we don't know would be introduce ourselves and say, hi, we're youth workers. And we would have our ID badges, and we're just out chatting with young people, checking on how you're doing, if everything's okay, if you're safe, if there's, and then, that usually is enough for them to say, so what is it you're doing then, and blah, blah, blah. And so we would have that conversation. Sometimes they're just like, yeah, hiya, bye, kind of thing. So that's fine as well. And I think this is the point where you have to be a specific type of person to do detached youth work. It's not everyone's bag, and a lot of youth workers don't really get it. But it is the real basis of what youth work's all about, and that's relationships. That's the kind of thing that you're trying to build and support. And for a lot of young people that are out in the street, they're really not interested in your regular youth work activities. They like being out, like maybe taking chances, being a bit dangerous, a bit of danger, a bit of rebellion going on. So all you're doing as a youth worker out in the street is forming a relationship with them and giving them a bit of consistency, so that they know that, whether they say, I don't want to talk to you, or, whatever, you need a thick skin, and you can eventually, they'll sometimes, after 3 weeks of trying, they'll say, okay, like, I'll talk to you this night. So it's about building that relationship, being consistent, and not being offended if they don't want to talk to you, which, yeah, some people find that challenging, but it works. Yeah. It does work.
Yeah, I'm sure that can be quite hard if you're kind of being rejected over and over, if there's nobody that wants to talk to you when you're on shift.
Yeah, if you're young and you're inexperienced, and I think some people as well, they kind of want to have an end game on a product, and it's really quite hard to just hand all that over to a young person and say, what do you want? You're driving this, and I'm here whether, and I can go if you don't want to speak to me, and so it can be quite challenging. So I think, yeah, a really experienced youth worker, I wouldn't take anyone that was too young or maybe close to peer group age, because it can be quite challenging and quite difficult to handle. So yeah, an experienced youth worker and someone with thick skin, I would say that's kind of the priority.
And do you think the way that young people have viewed detached youth workers has changed kind of over the years? I know that it's hasn't been maybe up until kind of this past year where it's been necessary, but has been becoming less popular as a method used by organisations. Have you experienced that in your area, or?
I would say that we experience the ebbs and flows and changes within young people going through the ranks of being the younger young people, then the like 15, 16-year-old young people, then the 18 plus young people. So we are constantly going through that cycle of, who are you? What are you doing? Do I trust you? Building relationships. And then we're back again for the new set of young people that are coming through. So it's constant. And within a night, we can be seeing 4 or 5 different age ranges. So we go through that motion so consistently that there's new people and old people always on the street. There's never really a time that we're like, we know none of these young people, because we've been so consistently for so many years working that they almost all know us now.
Mm-hmm. And yeah,
I don't think we really have that issue. I think maybe new people trying to do it would have that issue, but certainly I don't think that's something that we've hit.
Mm-hmm. And what about in this past year? How have things changed during lockdowns and COVID-19?
I guess we've noticed that it's been really quiet. And I think by and large, young people have really kind of, either their parents or carers have said, you're staying in, you're not going out. But there's not so many young people out in the street. I mean, on a Friday night, we could encounter 40 young people in a big group, you know, drinking, smoking weed, doing all that kind of stuff that they shouldn't be doing. And now that's unheard of, and certainly in the last year. And even on the lead up to bonfire night, which is normally a really busy time, this year it was so quiet until the night itself, and then that was a right royal affair, shall we say. I think lockdown fever has definitely kicked in, and they saved it all up for the 5th of November. That was quite an interesting night. But yeah, I've noticed that young people are, and actually struggling a bit as well, you know. When you do meet them, they're not doing great. So I think it's still really important to have that presence out in the street and to have those conversations with young people and say, how are you managing, you know, how are things? And yeah, it's tough.
What about you, Shelley? What's young people's reaction been then? The ones that you have seen out during lockdowns, how are they doing, and how are they reacting to the street work?
We are getting more young people wanting to speak to us than not. So normally it'd be quite normal for them to be like, no tonight, no tonight, we'll try again another night. We've not really been getting that. They've been quite chatty, open and saying that they're enjoying it, and that they can't wait till things go back to normal. But there is certainly less on the streets. I live in the area that I work in, so I have quite a lot of inside community knowledge, and it is really, really, really quiet in comparison to normal. And certainly with less young people on the streets.
And how has that affected then your practice? Has that made it easier or more challenging?
It makes it definitely more challenging, because if there's no young people on the streets, there's no one to interact with. And we know that they need help, and we know that they need support, but we also know that they're not attending school, so they're not able to get support there. We also know that the youth clubs are all shut, so they're not getting support there. So then that makes the next worry for us is, where are they getting support, and are they getting support, and what are they turning to cope and deal? So we are actually noticing that a lot of them are using more drugs than they were before, which obviously doesn't help them when they're really struggling. But it's hiding it more. It's like going underground rather than it being on the surface. So I think that our biggest issue is going to be after lockdown, and how we support young people back into a normal society and behaving in a normal manner, and how that works out, more than it being an issue now.
Mm-hmm. And you mentioned earlier about the relationship with the police and things, and obviously as part of Scottish Government's guidelines, they've now said that detached youth work from the 21st of January is permitted primarily to stop the spread of coronavirus, so breaking up large groups, for example. How has that kind of relationship with young people and then the police, you know, and that kind of thinking of being like an extension of the police or policing the community in some way, has that come across, do you think, to the young people, or really they're just kind of grateful to see you?
Yeah, I think we would always be very careful. I mean, when I saw that guidance, and I think one of our team did say, what, we've to be the COVID police? And I said, well, no, not really. I said, because if we're operating using universal brief interventions, then, you know, using COVID is another part of that. It's just saying, this is to keep you safe. This is to keep your family safe. Because a lot of young people do say, you know, I'm young, if I get COVID, I'll be fine. And I say, well, you know, what about your granny? What about your mum? What about, and they kind of think about it. So it's about having those conversations. And I don't feel I don't feel like we're policing it. I think it's just another mechanism to keep them safe and keep their families safe. And I think they hear it from us in a way that they don't feel like they're being policed.
Anything to add to that, Shelley?
I would just agree with what Mary's saying. It's another talking mechanism within our toolkit that we use in terms of supporting them.
Fab. Well, thank you both so much for recording and chatting with me today. For those who are watching, if you want to learn more about Detached Youth Work, we're running a free training session for practitioners on Thursday, the 18th of February at 6 till 8 p.m. via Zoom. And you can find the sign up link in the description below. And there's also an opportunity later in the month for practitioners to discuss their detached youth work practice and problem solve together with others at our Community of Practice event on Thursday, the 25th of February, 10:30 a.m. You can book your place in the link below. The next webinar in the series will be released next week on the No Knives, Better Lives YouTube channel. We hope you've enjoyed watching and found this useful.